My name is Rick Hendrickson, and I am currently special advisor to athletics at Northfield Mount Hermon.
All right. And I want to give everybody a preface here that's watching and listening. Usually we have strangers on here. And for the first time, we do not have a stranger. We have someone that I have known since I was 7 or 8 years old. And you've heard a lot of stories about my time and my coaching as being coached and wrestling. And Clifford and I riffing about our wrestling days in the singlets. And long behold, we finally got the man himself, my high school wrestling coach and my lifelong mentor, who's somehow couldn't just do 4 years, but I'm 40 years old and he's still a part of my life, Mr. Rick Hendrickson. So thank you, Rick, for coming in. And that's the last time I'm going to call you Rick. I'll be calling you Coach the rest of the episode. So everybody just noticed that.
Thanks, Nate. I was going to say, it's a little weird to call me Rick.
I actually have chills all over my body. Like it felt like you were going to jump through and lateral drop me for saying it. So I just got a little uncomfortable. So we're all good. So, well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm excited for everybody to get to know your story. And sometimes I'm going to ask you questions, obviously, that I already know the answer to. I'm just going to get that story out of you. And I want everybody to understand that one of the biggest things here is we kicked off the year last year with kind of talking about what it means to be a man in 2025. And I really feel like it's amazing that we can have you on to close out. I will rush this production so that it gets out next Monday, Tuesday before the end of the year, because it means a lot that we've spent a lot of time interviewing both men and female. But I think the biggest thing for Clifford and I is we've seen the way the media runs, the way society runs, that it's really important to start showing well-rounded men that are in touch with their emotional intelligence. They understand how to lead other people, and they understand how to keep people on the right track. And I'm actually getting emotional just saying this, because you are the reason that we are able to do that type of a theme and be able to be genuine and sincere, because you've instilled that in myself as well as so many other people. And I know you didn't know that was the theme this year going into it. But that's how we kicked off the year. And we've been really pushing through, trying to inspire younger, older, whatever it is, to let people understand that there are two ways to be a man in America. And not everything is what you see on television.
It's very true. Very true. In fact, I would say take the television part out of it right now, except for a few select series, if you will.
Exactly. Always keep Vikings in there, guys. All right. But when I want to talk about, I want to start out. I want to give everybody a little bit. Is that for a little backstory for you and I, so people have some context. Is you are my high school coach. They've heard the story about getting a scholarship into high school and a boarding school and having it open up a world of opportunities for me. And I've tied in with them in the past that you were a big driver for that. And you really helped me understand the nuances of seeing my life outside of a small town and where things can go, as well as how to live life very presently. And one of the things I also talk about very openly is that I lost my direction in life for a long time post high school. And I'm very open on the show about that. But you've always found a way to stay in the mix of that. And you found a responsible place with boundaries that wasn't an enabling statement. It was very much a guiding statement. And I want to publicly address that, because obviously today is my 3rd anniversary of my sobriety. And I woke up this morning feeling pretty excited. And it's awesome to have somebody in it's no matter the fact that we don't live near each other and we don't see each other all the time, I always have your voice in my head in different areas. And I did lose that for many years. And to come back to it, and recently we got to have lunch together and spend some time together. And it's been a very amazing journey, reconnecting and recalibrating and getting my life back on track. So I thank you for taking the time, and I'm excited for everybody to learn your story.
Thanks, Nate. I appreciate your words, and now I'm getting emotional. That's what happens, right? You're right. I mean, we met when you were 6 years old, I think, and I still have the photo of Nate Fochman at the All-American Wrestling Camp at Mercesburg Academy when you were about 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide. I mean, like you were like a square. And I threatened to show it to people. And our, Jennifer and Rachel considered you their brother, as we went through things. And we all go through difficult challenges, and at the same time, there's having trouble crossing the bridge, and then there's falling off the bridge. And as you said, you've been very open, and you fell off the bridge, and there were that there were some deep waters there for you. And Amy and I both wanted to always be there for, the support mechanism, and at the same time to try to hold you accountable to yourself. And you have a journey that I'm extremely proud of. Now, there are a few of our guys that I'm very, very proud of, and you're one of them in what it is that you've decided to do with your life, which is to help people understand and help people think about what it means to be a better human being. And you can be really successful. I know you and Cliff have a lot of back and forth on your show, and I think he's part of being able to show this. You can be very successful, and you can be at the same time very in touch with who you are, what you want to be, and how you want to be to other people. And that's actually ultimately what it's all about. What is it that you are to other people? How do you connect with those people? What is it that you extend to those people? Because, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times, and now we're off and running, right? You're either contributing or you're contaminating in every situation. Doesn't matter where you are. There is no neutral. I know some people would argue that, but I argue that you're either contributing and moving things forward, or you're contaminating and hindering the progress of things. And we use that in the wrestling room, but I use that in the work that I do with higher level senior leaders in schools and things like that as well, because I think that that's where you have to be. And it's not just about talking about things and putting policies together and things. It's about really stepping out to show this is what you mean and this is who you are. And, that's something that I think that you have stepped into in this journey that you have, that you had to get to a place where you were going to hold yourself accountable for who you wanted to be and who you wanted to be to others. And so you got to that point, and some valiant efforts actually, which ultimately then veered off, right? And
many times tried.
yeah, and I think that's the other thing about it. My son-in-law talks about being an expert at failure. He's a scientist, and he's in a field where you failed 19 times and succeed on the 20th. And we always talk to young people in particular, and even older adults. It's like, don't be afraid of failure, but we never actually embrace what that looks like and what that means in terms of what failing can be, and then what you can learn from that failure, and then be able to move on from it. It's like, well, don't be afraid of failure, but we need you to get this project done. That type of thing. With every time you had that good intent, and it was very good intent, very strong intent, there was evidently something that just wasn't clicked in the right place, and you have to get to that point where it's got to be clicked into the right place, and people will give up and succumb to it. I can't do it, versus what you did, which was at a certain point, you clicked in the right place, and now here you are 3 years later.
Yeah, it's a lot of things, and a lot of shedding. And I'll tell everybody, just so they're like, anybody that wants to take any lessons from it, it's a lot of shedding. And that's the unfortunate part, is shedding mentality, shedding mindset, and most importantly, it was sometimes shedding people. And that's not anything about anybody or anybody blamed or anything like that. And I want to always say, this is my decisions and my decisions. And and I don't have anything on anybody else. But as I learned a lot more through therapy, and very intensive therapy, I actually never told you this. I'll tell you this real quick, and then we'll jump into your story. Ended up doing an immersion therapy, which was, I went through 5 therapists, and on the 5th one, I finally got one that was also a recovering alcoholic. And then that's what happened. Was then the safe stop sounded right. It actually clicked in, and we opened up and unlocked some things. And he literally had me go to a bar, and if I had a craving, I went to a bar, sat at the bar, ordered a beer, and stared at the beer, and just told myself all the negative things that affected me in my life. And I did it a couple times. I would, at different days and stuff like that. It's to the point now, I'm not gonna, your son-in-law is a better scientist than me, but I had, when I was making a cocktail with some clients, I grabbed a little dropper, and I was like, I'm just going to do 1 dropper to make sure the recipe's done. It tasted like rubbing alcohol. And he told me a year ago, he's like, you're going to psychologically convince yourself that it's going to go into your sensory and it's going to match that taste. And it sure as hell it did. And it's one of those things where I don't use it as a crutch, you know what I mean, or anything like that. But it was one of those things where even though I wasn't craving at that moment and it wasn't my mentality at that moment, it was just for actual business, it tastes like rubbing. And everybody else is around drinking full glasses like, this is incredible. This is incredible. I'm like, God damn, I was like, I'm horrible at this. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, I want to get into your story, and I want to kind of start at the very beginning. I want people to know where you originate from and then where you are, because a lot of times people really stay within their geographic region of where they grew up, and that's not something you ever did. And then your family thus is spread out because of that same mentality that the world is not just in your backyard. The world is a big place, and there's plenty of opportunities out there. So start me off with like where you were born and kind of give the audience that geography and community and everything like that, where you came from originally, and then we'll kind of work our way to Berkeley Springs.
Okay. I was going to say, I'll give you the 2-minute version because there's got to be some time limit on this, right?
Yeah, you're good.
So I was born and raised in Grafton, West Virginia, which is in north central West Virginia. The family, no, I never knew my birth father. And I had, my dad. And, people say, well, that's your stepdad. I was like, well, he's my dad, because the way I defined dad was that's the person that is the most prominent in your life and helps guide you, etc. We were, there's a saying about being from the other side of the tracks. We were from the other side of the tracks. And I was talking about this with a young person the other day. We were having a conversation, and I don't know how it even came up, but we were technically, we would have been classified as homeless a couple times because very early on, there were a couple of times where we wound up staying with an aunt or staying with somebody. And I never knew it. My mom was the youngest of 10. My grandmother had lost her husband when her husband was in his early 40s. And so she raised children, and those children helped raise other children. I was, the youngest grandchild at the time coming in, and, my mom was very young. She was 17 when she had me. And I'm going to turn my phone off. Our family chat's blowing up right now. And so, and I present this because my world was very close. It was very insulated, and it was very tight because the world was Grafton and the surrounding area. And it was very strong connectivity and relationships. It was very close to my mother. I wound up being the oldest of 5. And so as we progressed through, one of the things that I figured out from elementary school into middle school was that there were things I liked in school. There were things I didn't like in school, but there were things that I liked in school. I also was very aware at a certain point, and we can talk about this a little bit, how the way society works and the structures that we have, and not just the greater areas, but in education. I became aware that I was really poor when I was like in middle school. And so I knew of that. And, I carried a little bit of that with me. Like I was one of the kids in the free or reduced lunch line. We weren't the group that could joke around about it and, hey, da da da. We were more the group of, okay, just get your lunch and go on. And so it was kind of like there was a drive there from an early age of, okay, this is what life is like. What else is there? And there was a time of envy. There was a time of, wait, why do they have this and that? But there was always family love. My dad struggled to be a dad, and I'm telling you a lot here. Some of which some of which you won't know. My dad was a man who was trying to be a good man. And I know that your theme is what it means to be a man. That's why I bring this up. He had no clue how to be a dad. He knew how he was treated by his dad. And, we're talking about me growing up. I was born in 1962. So we're talking, I'm 8 years old in 1970. Think about the world in that time, right? And think about who had raised those kids, the veterans out of World War II and otherwise. And so, there was a lot going on in the house, and my brother Jim and I were not angels by any means. So there was a lot that we had to learn, and he was trying to be a dad, and there were difficulties, shall we say, in that regard. Um, and at the same time, one of the things about my dad was that he worked, and his thing was, I'm going to work, and going to put food and on the table and shelter. Like, we're going to take care of this. And eventually, he was able to do that. But there was this definition of what a man needed to be and how he needed to act and things. So I saw that play out in a number of ways through high school. And it was in middle school, the area that I discovered also sports. And sports was the outlet, because sports was, first of all, I had a lot of energy. And then second, sports was a place, and the sports that I fell into were the ones where it didn't matter how much money you had, who your parents were, and these things. It mattered about whether you could do it or not. And so football was big. We were a Friday Night Lights town. I mean, it was a town of 5,500 people, and they've got a football stadium that holds 25. So literally, they expected half the town to be there, and they would. And so, I grew up in football and these other things, and got to high school, and football was one of those places, for example, that if you were good enough, you played. It didn't matter. And wrestling was started at my high school my freshman year. We didn't have uniforms. We wore the phys ed uniform for our first match. And we had a coach who literally taught us from a book, because it was the baseball coach. And they said, hey, we need a wrestling coach. We're going to have a wrestling team. And he said, hey, I'll do it. And so, I lost an Upton a ton because of his patience and because of just taking on something that literally shaped and changed my life. Because wrestling was even more so than football, that if you were the best at that weight class, you won the wrestle off, you wrestled. It was the most equal sport I had ever encountered. It was also the most difficult sport that I had ever encountered. And it was hard. And it taught me, I'm a much better coach than I ever was a wrestler, because it taught me a lot of things about myself that I was able to work with other people, including you, on in terms of self-belief. So, went through high school, and until my end of my junior year in high school, I thought I was going to play college football, because that was, the dream coming out of Grafton High. And some things happened, and I wound up not playing football my senior year, which is on me. And I still wrestled, and, decided that I was going to go to Fairmont State College, which was about 20 miles away, because that's what you did. And it is kind of cool. You talk about us being far flung now, because that's what you did. You grew up and you went to college and you came back. And Nate, I'll tell you, my thing in late in high school and going into college was, I'm going to go get my degree, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to show these people that I made something of myself, because that's what it was all about. It was about proving that you could make something of yourself, proving to others that you weren't, the white trash anymore, that kind of thing. And so I had also fallen in love with journalism and English because of teachers, which is a large reason why I eventually settled in there. When I went into college, there were these two fledgling networks that had just started. You've probably heard of them. One was called ESPN, and the other was MTV. So it's been a while, right? And sorry, I thought I had turned that off. But so I go into college. I'm going to go to Fairmont. I was very lightly recruited, but I was recruited, and I was going to wrestle there. And in May or June, they told us that they weren't going to have a team, because this was an era at, Title IX had come into being in 1972, and there were a lot of athletic departments trying to figure out how to fund football and basketball teams and other teams with the money they had, while they still had to offer equal opportunities to women. Okay. And I'm going to tell our daughters to take me off this chat.
Say, mute me for 28 minutes.
Hold on one second. So while I do this. Okay. My grandson's sick, so there's my he's being taken to the doctor and stuff. Anyway, I love journalism. I love English. I'm thinking about what am I going to do? Decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and go to Fairmont anyway. My journalism teacher went there. He had a great experience. They had a great journalism program. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's going to be something in this area. I love to write. I love to read, which I got from my mom, and then, go from there. And I'm there for a couple of years. And really enjoying the journalism program, but also just kind of missing something. And I had one of the 5 people that I consider most influential in my life and mentor was a guy named Joe Natter Nicola at Fairmont Senior High School. And I was helping him, and I was wrestling AAU and doing some things. And as we talked, as we went through, I started orienting towards, I think I want to go into education, and I want to coach. And he was the one who said to me, if you don't go try to wrestle in college, you're going to regret it. And so, again, you always stay in state at that point. So I wound up at West Liberty State College with Coach Vince Monceau, who's one of the other 5 people that was, a mentor for me. And I'll wrap this up a little bit. I go through college at West Liberty. I meet my wife of 41 years now, Amy, and I have an experience there that kind of shapes what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I decided, again, I'm going into education. So I'm going to teach, I'm going to coach. Graduated in 1985, which was the beginning of, it was like right in the middle of what was the biggest recession before 2008. So it was a significant recession, big time. And I got to tell you this one, because your listeners will love this, not your readers, sorry. But I'm looking for jobs, and I'm looking at different places. Maybe I'll go to Delaware, maybe I'll go to Florida. There's a lot of places. Florida's really growing. And I'll look locally because we can live with with Amy's parents for a while, getting our feet. It's something we do. And I got offered a job at a local school, and I was going to teach 6 classes, coach 3 sports, and do lunch duty. And they were going to pay me $12,500 a year. That's what it was. That literally was what I was going to make. And the short end is I didn't do that one. And I had a fraternity brother who was a really good friend of mine. And Danny and I decided we're going to go look in the Eastern Panhandle. Nate, this was a point where my wife didn't actually know where I was going to interview. She knew it was somewhere. She knew where the Eastern Panhandle was, but she's like, okay, go interview there, right? And so I go over and I meet Horace Blankenship, who was a fantastic person and who had taken over the Berkeley Springs wrestling program. I interviewed at 3 different places, and I wasn't going to get the Berkeley Springs job, but because Horace had made such a commitment to that program that he decided that, for whatever reason, that I was going to be a good fit for them. He went in and resigned as the head wrestling coach and kind of forced the situation. So now it was like, wait a second, this guy's the most qualified person we have who can be, wrestling coach. And so that's how I got my job at Berkeley Springs. I was not going to get that job, but Horace went in, resigned as the head wrestling coach. They hired me as the head wrestling coach, and then he applied and got the assistant wrestling coach job. So for the
I never knew that. This is the first time I'm hearing that story.
Yeah, you've never heard that one, right? And so what weaves in here is this theme to me, and it always circles back to what it means to be a man and what it means to be a human. Not just in 2025, but there were people, Joe Natter Nicola, Vince Monceau, and then even Horace, who did things for the greater good of others and who committed themselves for something that was not about glory, not about success for them personally, but something that was greater than themselves. And it's from those types of people that, I was able to learn. And at a certain point, was able to gain and understand what exactly it was they were teaching me. And it took me a while. I always tell people when I was 25, I thought my job was to win. I was supposed to win in the classroom with kids. You can't do this. Well, you're going to learn how to do it. That's a win, right? And on the wrestling mats and on the football field, because I was coaching football, things like that. I thought my job was to win. And I know there was impact on young people at that point, but you come to understand that it's not, the kid doesn't care that they got the A+ as much as they do that you help them understand and believe in themselves, which is what led to the A plus. So when I have, it's so interesting because I have what I still consider young people, from those very first years as a teacher who will get in touch with me and say something about that impact, and that was unintentional because I didn't know what I was doing, but somehow I was doing the right thing. And I learned how to be more intentional as I was surrounded by great colleagues and had experiences and great people, because nobody does this alone, right? You've talked about your journey. None of us do it alone. So, I learned a lot. And after I was in my 8th year at Berkeley Springs. We were very, very good. I was also getting burned down on the candle, man. It was a grind, but it was great. And in one sense, but it wasn't great otherwise. And so I got a call from the athletic director at a place called Mercesburg Academy. The only thing I knew about Mercesburg Academy was that we were going to drop them in wrestling because they weren't competitive with us. We tried to wrestle some PA schools every year, and we were only about an hour from them. And I also knew that they had a lovely campus, and I hated their gym because I couldn't find my way around. And so, this guy gets in touch with me and says, "Hey, we're looking for an English teacher and a wrestling coach, and your name was given to me." And, to my great surprise, and we go back to what makes a man, Ron Tebben, very, very well, had given my name to Mercesburg Academy. Ron was an assistant coach with us, volunteer assistant at Berkeley Springs, a fantastic human being, very accomplished. He was an actor. He was I think he was a world champion in his 70s in judo.
Judo, yeah.
Was at the Naval Academy, flew in Vietnam. I mean, he's the man. And so Ron did that, and I get this call. We had just built a brand new home, and we had 9 seniors coming back the next year. After the end of that season in West Virginia, we were going to be the number 1 ranked team in the state, and started looking at it. And this is where the world opens up, and this is where we start changing our world. The more I talk to the people at Mercersburg, the more I like the idea of boarding school, which when I got into it was like, I thought it was Robin Williams in a tweed jacket with dark mahogany paneling.
My captain.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was, hey, you get to teach. Because when I got to Mercersburg, I would talk to my colleagues at Berkeley Springs, and they'd be like, "What's the difference?" I said, "Well, first of all, every kid in the class is here because they want to be here and they want to learn. And second, I have 95% less paperwork to do. So I actually can focus on my teaching, and they give me latitude. I don't have to go by a strict curriculum. They give me latitude to be able to explore things. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but it's for the benefit of the learner." So we're focused on the learner. The other thing that I'll throw in here, by the way, because you and I know boarding schools, but most people don't, is that there are some things that boarding schools do and independent day schools do that if we could ever get public schools to look at and embrace, to truly allow people to teach and learn in the best environment, public schools could just knock the socks off of it, And the difference is that you don't have all the restrictions and things in the private schools more so than anything else, because I've known and still know some fantastic public school teachers. They're going to be fantastic teachers no matter where they are, and that's something I think is very important.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a conversation Kelly and I were in after we went to lunch, and then also the candlelight. And it's really at its core, if you take all the flashiness, and I'm going to sarcastically pick on boarding schools, you take out all the expensive buildings, all the expensive technology, and all of that stuff, but you take the core philosophies of the attention to detail, the teacher to student ratio, and you actually invested in that, we would be exponentially better as an educational system from a public school level, because these kids could start thriving in a certain way. A lot of that stuff, like, a lot of people think it's not attainable because they go to these schools and they're like, well, how do we have a $500 million endowment fund and do that? You don't have to do that. You can take the philosophies and the mindset and incorporate them in a hut in the woods for all it matters. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a matter of that intensity and that presence that doesn't translate sometimes. And it's not the buildings, and it's not the blazers and stuff like that,
Yeah, and when you're talking, the other aspect of it is because there are fantastic teachers in these schools, um, and I've been back into public schools of late, and sometimes I wonder, I'm like, man, how did you decide to still do this despite what you're facing? When you're talking mostly and more about classroom management than you are learning environment, then you have a challenge.
Mhm.
And I will say this now that you've given me my podium, in that there may be another profession like this, but I don't know if there is, that somebody else who has no qualifications can come in and tell you how to do your job. I have a plumber come to my house. I don't tell him how to do his job. I let the plumber do his thing. I may ask a lot of questions because I want to learn, but I let the plumber do his thing because he knows what he's doing. And all respect, because I'm a parent. And at the same time, when you look at the qualifications for the Board of Education in most places, when you look at the aspects of how things are put together, the challenge that public education has right now is that it's focused so much on the rules and the regulations that the actual learning and the teaching that's going on there with the kids is what gets lost. And I will also argue with you or to you that this is not about the kid who doesn't want to be here. This is not about the kid who that kid is a good kid. That there's a key that unlocks something. And if you give teachers the latitude, if you give them the opportunity, they can help that kid unlock it. And when that kid unlocks it, they lock in. They will lock in an English classroom, in a math classroom, or whatever else. There's not one kid that walks into a school that says, I don't want to be a good person and I don't want to be a good, like, there's not a kid like that. That's not what people do. All kids are good kids. And there's something that shapes them. There is that part that we don't know what happens before they walk through the doors. We have no idea about the life beyond that sometimes. So we need to create the environments um, that allow that student to come in and explore and learn and believe in themselves, because that's the most important thing that a teacher and a coach does. And the other aspect of this is that we need to find a way to get more men involved in education, because part of what we see happening with young people today is that boys who are learning to be men in society are not sure how that all works, and where they're pulling their influences from is a lot of places. And that's not a slam against female teachers at all. I mean, teachers it's a noble profession, and female teachers are great. I mean, all teachers, I think, but it's that element that, you could say people were surprised that I was an English teacher, for example. Said, "Oh, you're an English teacher?" I was like, "What, did you expect me to be a phys ed teacher?" And I had a parent one time say, "Well, yeah, you're a coach." I was like, "Well, that's not how it works." And I enjoy a book as much as I do enjoy teaching a move.
I'm not
And
just
so,
a piece of meat, lady. I got a brain too.
yeah, and I think that's the big element of it. There are people who there are young men who do not go into education to become teachers because they don't think that's what young men do. That's my point. And it can be, something where you are a powerful influence in the lives of others in the way that you live your life. Because one of the interesting things about school is you get to know a lot about your teachers. You get to know a lot about your coaches. Think about how well you got to know me.
Yeah.
Right? And think about how well you got to know your teachers, especially, at Mercesburg, but even beyond. And I remember the teachers that were so influential in my life and how much I got to know about them.
Yeah.
And so you spend more time in school than anywhere else in the first 18 years of your life. Like, it is the single biggest time commodity that's taken.
Mhm.
So why not make that a place where you are surrounded, exposed to, and influenced by people that can help you understand how to believe in yourself, and that also offer, things like critical thinking.
That's a great piece, and that's especially the critical thinking part and reasoning and things like that. I think it's there's, even from a very foundational level, there's a few core classes that could go into something to really elevate things as well. But for sake of time, I want to pause here because I want to go deeper I want to go
Hey,
deeper
hey,
in that.
this is your fault. You asked me,
I
give the
know,
life story, and then you just let me take off.
you'd be proud of me in my older age. I'm very good at not interrupting you. And I wasn't before in my past. So we've been down that road before. So I'll give myself a pat on the back. But for this one, I'm going to say I got to pause for 1 sec because in
Okay.
the last 10 minutes here, I want to talk about adventure camp in the way of entrepreneurship and leadership. Because despite the fact you didn't own the program, you really did an entrepreneur type strategy there.
Mhm.
And I wanted you to talk about it with the teaching. And I want you to talk about how you went even deeper with teaching to then being the summers and literally, like, I want everybody to know, created so many different programs that touch so many lives, and you created it from scratch. And I don't mean bootstrapped, I mean conceptually from scratch, and then from there the reinvestments and rebuilds and how it grew out. So I want, because you have that very unique thing outside of coaching and outside of English. I want people to know about the summer programs experience as well.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about that, Nate. That was a labor of love, if you will, in one sense, and I think that ties in, and it's probably one of the most least understood industries, least understood products out there. And you were a part of that as well. You know, you were one of our counselors at what became Mercesburg Adventure Camps. And what set that up, I stepped from being an English teacher and a coach to essentially being a business person and a coach. And what set that up in large part was another mentor, Doug Hale. So now I've mentioned three of the five, right? And Doug's charge that he wanted us to build something at Mercersburg that would reflect the values of the school, that would do these things, but that was also business oriented. And he said to me, when I say summer programs, you need to hear admissions, because people need to come to our campus to understand that this is great education, because otherwise, why would they come? You know, and he was right, you know. So what Doug also knew, and what was, he's a great business as well, was that you have to learn the business first. So that first year that I was asked to do this, I was able to essentially research the market and analyze the market, look for where our market share might be. And those were terms that I was learning. And I was helped in part by Gail Wolf, who was the CFO at the school at the time, because I was working with a budget that included revenue for the first time. So I'd worked with budgets before, but not something that was you get revenue in, you got expenses out, you got to do this, you got to do that. I had run my own wrestling camp, and so there was that part where we had put the wrestling camp together and we were making money. It was like, oh, this is great. And the school, the school benefited from that as well. But it was about looking at the market and what was being offered. And we took a chance. And because of Doug's faith in what we were going to do, and I guess me, we were able to put together these programs. But we looked at foundational principles first. And I learned something that you learned it at a lot younger age than I did. I was much, much older, just learning about when you put together a novel product and you're going to distinguish it from other products, that what is it that you do, how do you do it, but how do you keep it real? Like what is the reality of it? And there's also the part where it may not work.
Mm-hmm.
So a strategy that we utilized was that we would do the research for any program that we put on the market, and we would make sure that we had it set. There were certain pillars that structural components that we had to put together, the business plan, right? And then we would give it 3 years to be profitable. And profitable was calculated in two ways. One was it could still lose a little bit of money on the front end if we were gaining admissions applications from it on the back end, because it might cost $1,000 to go to theater camp, but it cost at that time $65,000 to go to the boarding school, right? And so there was a dividend that was paid. We started tracking all of those things. This was early. My early education, and it was actually early in market analytics. In fact, Google Analytics was something that we were introduced to, and it wasn't. There were a lot of things that we did in that regard. But the number one thing that we did that made us successful is that the investment, the biggest investment, the prime investment, was people. Because we knew if we had the right people working the program, if we had the right people working with those young people, the students or the campers or whoever, if we put all of that together and we supported them to allow them to do their jobs, which if in any successful business, I would argue that if you put your employees in a position where they can do their jobs the best, you're going to have the most productivity, right? And so the investment in people and the training of people, and just think about some of the things that we did. We always did the trip to the Lower Yakagani for rafting. And that was not just so that everybody could see, okay, this is where we go rafting, et cetera. It wasn't, people talk about bonding. That was so that you could learn how to really depend on one another. Because when you have 6 people in a raft in a class 3 rapid, you have to work together. And if you have to work together there and you can share that, then you can take those experiences beyond that. And I think, that's one of the key aspects that can be lost in business today is that people come in and, once a quarter, a business will do a something, we're all going to go out and do an alpine thing, whatever,
Dust
like,
balls.
Yeah, it's got to be continuous. It's got to be something that's continuous. And so the other thing that I think was important with those people, as you well know, is that there was a constant feedback loop. We got feedback from campers. We got feedback from parents. You got feedback from me. I got feedback from counselors. You remember that every time we finished those midnight things, it was, okay, does anybody have anything else to bring up? Everything was on the table for us. And if I wasn't doing something right, somebody needed to tell me. If somebody else wasn't doing something right, somebody needed to say something. There's a great book, at least I think it's a great book. It's one of the 2 books I have on my desk. The Culture Code. The other is Think Like a Freak from the guys who wrote Freakonomics. And it is a way for you to think in a divergent fashion about life and about how you approach things. And I think that was what made us the most successful, because we did the advertising, we did the marketing, but when we looked at our market share, our main market was returning campers and referrals. 80% of the kids who came to our programs after they were established, after 3 years, were coming because of referrals or returnees.
That's I just realized as you were telling me this that I always credit the alcohol industry as my foray into sales, but I just realized as you were telling that story, you were actually the first one that hired me for sales, because when I did I would do the camp festivals.
You did the camp fairs. Yeah. You were one of the people that did the camp fairs.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, the reason you did it was because we knew you'd be great at it, that you would talk to anybody who walked by, whether it was a mall or otherwise, right? And one of the things that you did so well, because you were such a popular counselor, was that you could connect with any kid. And so when we were choosing personnel, we were choosing people for what their talents were and their skills.
I won't go too deep into the story, but I'll let you know, a couple episodes ago, I told the story about Alex.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Alex. Woo.
And I talked about how life-changing of experience it was, and how that kid had every obstacle in front of him from a physical and literal standpoint, but he was the most positive individual I've ever met in my life. All joking aside, he said he would always do everything because I was the one that was going to have to haul the wheelchair out of the van, as he joked.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. For sure.
No, but it's always stuck with me, and that summer with him really stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think that
as well as the accident summer I've talked about on here as well, that people have heard me talk about, which that summer woke up too. You wake up with a lot of scenarios and you realize life is as much as you can plan an itinerary, it doesn't always work out that way,
Well, and I'm sure you've probably brought this up before. Shame on you if you haven't, but roll with the punches. roll with the punches. Oh, we were going to do that. We're going to roll with the punches, and we're going to pivot immediately and do X. Ultimately, the thing that made us the most successful, and it is kind of crazy, given the nature of this podcast and such, I'll share this. The first year that I took over, 1998, so these are $1998, we made $158,000 in summer programs, and it was primarily rentals. We had 300 kids there for a soccer camp. We got nothing out of it. There was no return. There were no inquiries. All we did was make a little bit of money, and they tore the hell out of our soccer fields. So when we looked at it, it was actually it was a negative, right? And I was the summer programs director of the last year that I was there. As the Great Recession was hitting in 2008, we grossed 1.3 million. The other thing that we had done is that we had built summer programs to the point where anywhere from 8 to 15% of the kids coming in to the school each year were influenced to apply and come to the school by their experience in summer program. So we had the direct revenue, and then we had the other, applicable components of it. And you were in part one of those kids. You came to one of the first All-American Wrestling camps.
Yeah, I mean, it really unintentionally, like I literally went through every facet and every aspect of it.
Yeah.
To the point of, I was doing stuff during the school year. I was doing stuff in college for it. I did it for many years and I absolutely loved it. I talk about it a lot on here because it meant a lot. It meant a lot to me. Every single summer meant a lot to me. And I'll say it. And in closing, I want to leave it as like, I want to have you on again and talk with Clifford, because I know he's going to have a lot of questions and stuff like that. But I want you to realize a couple things. I realized as you were telling the story, even though the stories I did, I admittedly, like, the drinking affected a lot of memories and things like that in different times. And that's something that I'm just realizing too, is even the JWAS and all that stuff, like, that's my entire life. I mean, I have a tattoo, Robert Cross, the 2 roads and the fork and the tree on my back of my cap. Like, life is full of two different paths, and you got to figure out the in between. And I try to drive that home for people. And I really actually didn't think about that when I brought you on, that there's a lot more than I recalled originally, of how those things are really pillars and foundational things of how I live everything and run this business. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. I cannot express it enough. And this is by no means production. I will remind everybody, we have known each other for an extremely long amount of time, near 35 maybe years. I got to say, I do some bad math. I never was good at math, and so that was one of my and not my strong suit. But I want to thank you so much, and I want to tell everybody to please remember to look at a stranger when you're walking down the street. Hold a door for somebody. Don't be an asshole. And just realize you have no idea what's going on in somebody's day, and it costs nothing to be a nice person. So one last time, I will say Rick, and then I'll end it with Coach, is Rick Hendrickson. Thank you so much for taking the time, Coach. I love you, man. You have been a second father to me my entire life, and your commitment and being in my corner, and I hope that I can reciprocate throughout the course of my life back to you.
Well, thanks, Nate. And I appreciate your patience and probably your audience's patience, because I know I went on talk about riffs. I went there for a while, but I agree with you. The bottom line is that it only takes this. You said, don't be an asshole. I literally have a hoodie, a sweatshirt that just says, do good. Just do good, just do right by people, and you will have that impact on them. When we talk about young men and people learning how to be young men, just do right. And just do good in that regard, to give them somebody to talk to work with, to think about what's this really look like for us, and what's that mean. And I always love talking to you, that I love you, and my family loves you, and we have forever. For your audience, I wasn't joking when I said my daughters, Nate had a bedroom in our house. Like when he got to a certain point in high school, we were like that second family, if you will. And so our daughters just referred to him sometimes when people met him as, oh, well, he's kind of our brother. Like, he's our brother. And now then they got a brother, and he was the uncle of that brother.
I got older quick.
Yeah. So I appreciate the opportunity. I would love to come back on with Cliff. I'd love to talk about some of this other leadership aspect with you specifically. I mean, we got a little bit into it today. We sound a bit intrinsic in that regard, and I think there's some real, there's some real good footprint components to what we could talk about what leadership looks like across the board with people, and the reality of what it is versus all those books you can read.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. Well, hey, I got to close out for this to hop on for another one, but you have a good rest of your weekend. If I don't talk to you earlier, you have a good New Year's, and I would be dropping this one Monday, Tuesday.
All right. Happy New Year, buddy.
You too. Take care, man.
See ya.